Hey everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. This is Daily Drop number 11, and what I'm doing tonight is I have an article from August 19th from The Guardian, and while it's a little bit old, it's relevant to what we've been talking about, especially with the revelations of Mr. Gates coming to the forefront in the last couple of days. Today in the news, it's been very slow. A few stories piggybacking off of the Time story about Bill Gates and Jeffrey Epstein, but nothing that we really should dive into and cover. So I thought I'd go back and I'd read this story since we weren't doing the daily drops then. There's some older stories that are very relevant to what's going on. So on days when the news is slow and I can't find anything that I think we really should do a dive on, what I'll do is I'll read some of these articles that we might have missed since we weren't doing the daily drops. So with that said, we'll jump right to it. Private jets, parties, and eugenics. Jeffrey Epstein's bizarre world of scientists. According to his indictment, over the course of many years, Jeffrey Epstein sexually exploited and abused dozens of minor girls at his homes in Manhattan, New York, and Palm Beach, Florida, among other locations. It continues, in order to maintain and increase his supply of victims, Epstein also paid certain of his victims to recruit additional girls to be abused. Some of his victims were reportedly as young as 14. Virginia Joffrey was one of those girls, claiming in newly unsealed documents that she was recruited at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida by socialite, heiress, and Epstein's alleged accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell. All right, you guys know how I feel about that kind of labeling. We'll drop all of that and we'll just call her what she is, a pedophile. In 2000, when she was just 16, Joffrey now describes her time with Epstein as being forced to be a sex slave. Shortly after a sworn deposition became public, Epstein was found dead in his holding cell, apparently from suicide. Epstein's lifestyle has been well documented. He owned a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands and jetted around the world with rich and powerful men, including the Clintons, Trump, Woody Allen, Larry Bird, and Prince Andrew. He had been indicted in 2008 when he walked away with a sweetheart deal that gave him minimal jail time and shielded any possible co-conspirators. One aspect of Epstein's life of luxury seems incongruously out of place, though. He surrounded himself with prominent scientists, Harvard professors, multiple Nobel Prize winners, authors, almost exclusively men. Epstein kept his social gatherings stocked with some of the world's most eminent figures in this world. He would host dinners at his Upper East Side Manhattan apartment and invite a mix of leading scientists and people from the world of fashion and modeling. One scientist who preferred to remain anonymous told Slate that there was virtually no interaction between these two sets of guests. Sometimes he turned to his left and asked some sciencey question. Then he turned to his right and asked the model to show him her portfolio. Slate claimed that a young female staffer emerged in the middle of one of these dinners to give Epstein a neck massage while he talked. When he gathered 21 physicists on his private island, that's the island that we all know for its disgustingness, for a 2006 meeting about gravity, he reportedly had 3 to 4 young women in tow at all times. He also met many scientists at an annual gathering hosted by John Brockman, a literary agent who represented famous science authors such as Stephen Hawking and Jared Diamond. Nobel-winning physicist Murray Gell-Mann, who discovered the quark and was represented by Brockman, thanked Epstein for his financial support in the acknowledgement section of his 1995 book, The Quark and the Jaguar. A partial list of biggest scientific names in Epstein's orbit, according to the New York Times, includes the theoretical physicist and best-selling author Stephen Hawking, the paleontologist and evolutionary biologist Stephen Jay Gould, Oliver Sacks, the neurologist and best-selling author, George M. Church, a molecular engineer who has worked to identify genes that could be altered to create superior humans, and the MIT theoretical physicist Frank Wilczek, a Nobel laureate. Epstein called himself a science philanthropist and donated handsomely to prestigious organizations such as Harvard, MIT, and the Santa Fe Institute. At one point, he was allegedly giving as much as $20 million a year to fund scientists. Some institutions and researchers continue to take Epstein's money even after his 2008 conviction, like MIT, according to BuzzFeed News. Sounds like our buddy Mr. Gates as well, huh? Epstein called himself a science philanthropist and donated handsomely to prestigious organizations. So that's the quote in the middle of the story there. Joe Ito, the head of MIT's world-famous Media Lab, issued an apology last week for having accepted donations for the Media Lab and his own tech startups. In his open letter on an MIT's Media Lab website, he said, "I take full responsibility for my error and judgment. I am deeply sorry to the survivors, to the Media Lab, and to the MIT community for bringing such a person into our network." Regrettably, over the years, the lab has received money through some of the foundations that he controlled. I also allowed him to invest in several of my funds, which invest in tech startup companies outside of MIT. Last month, Jenna Marshall, a spokesperson for the Santa Fe Institute, said in the BuzzFeed news story that a $25,000 donation in 2010 from Epstein prompted our leadership to decide not to accept any additional funds from Mr. Epstein or related sources. They were, she said, considering donating an equal amount to a charity working with victims of sex trafficking. Boy, that makes it so much better. You're just going to donate the money. How about having better judgment and not taking the money in the first place, knowing who you're taking this money from? Several years after his 2008 conviction, publications including Forbes, the National Review, and HuffPo all ran stories on Epstein praising him as a selfless philanthropist, a hedge funder with a zealous scientific background, and one of the largest backers of cutting-edge science around the world. This is after he was convicted. Forbes, National Review, and the HuffPo. Remember that next time you read those articles, those publications. None of the articles mentioned his criminal history, and an investigation by the New York Times claimed they were used as part of a public relations campaign to revamp Epstein's image. All three publications have since deleted or amended articles cited by the New York Times. What have I been talking about? The media has run cover for this man from the very beginning. And now it's starting to break a bit, but still, they've circled the wagons and they've formed ranks because they know that it's going to hurt people that are important to them. By most accounts, he would engage with his guests at his science-related parties, but never for very long or very deeply, often derailing conversations by abruptly changing topics or turning other people's comments into jokes. That's the sign of a small mind, by the way. Still, some of his scientists seem smitten. In a 2002 profile of Epstein for New York Magazine, Martin Nowak, remember him from the Gates article now a professor of biology and mathematics and head of the program of evolutionary dynamics at Harvard, said that he once broke out a blackboard during a dinner with Epstein and for 2 hours gave a mathematical description of how language works. Jeffrey has the mind of a physicist. It's like talking to a colleague in your field. Sometimes he applies what he talks about to his investments. Sometimes it's for his own curiosity. He has changed my life. Because of his support, I feel I can do anything I want, Nowak said. Now remember, Nowak has said, "Oh, I really didn't know him after that. There's no way I want to be involved with him." There's, it's such BS. And that's why we're reading this article, even though it's old, so you guys sort of get some perspective and a bit of context about what I'm talking about. Lawrence Krauss, a physicist who retired from Arizona State, even continued defending Epstein after the 2008 conviction, telling the Daily Beast in 2011, "As a scientist, I always judge things on empirical evidence, and he always has women ages 19 to 23 around him, but I've never seen anything else. So as a scientist, my presumption is that whatever the problems were, I would believe him over other people." He added, "I don't feel tarnished in any way by my relationship with Jeffrey. I feel raised by it." Well, guess what? That's probably because you were on the island engaged in the same behavior, my man. You were seen there several times. What were you doing there? Why haven't you been put on blast yet? You got fired from your job at Arizona State University for supposedly harassing somebody sexually. So take it easy, pal, because you're coming up next. Other scientists seem to have been drawn to the attention and the spotlight that Epstein gave to them. Evolutionary biologist George Church, one of the few researchers who has apologized for having contact with Epstein, which he attributes to nerd tunnel vision, told Stat News that he is used to find financiers, technologists, and celebrities seeking him out and has become a quasi-celebrity himself. Many of the scientists and researchers began distancing themselves from Epstein after 2008 and have publicly condemned him since his arrest in July. Scone author Steven Pinker, who was flown to a TED conference on Epstein's private jet in 2002, including Daniel Dennett, John Brockman, has recently refuted, including Daniel Dennett, and John Brockman, has recently refuted any suggestions that he knew or had any relationship with Epstein. In a response published on the Evolution is True website, Pinker said, the annoying irony is that I could never stand the guy, never took research funding from him, and always tried to keep my distance. I think the dislike was mutual. According to a friend, he voted me off of the island. Given my long-standing distaste for everything Epstein, it's galling to be publicly associated with him based on some photos and mutual associates. Dennett has since said that he had never heard of Epstein when he boarded the jet, but while Epstein may not have been able to contribute much to the conversations he cultivated around him, he did have sincere interest in at least some scientific topics. The New York Times did a deep dive into Epstein's scientific beliefs in an article titled Jeffrey Epstein Hoped to Seed Human Race with His DNA. That alone just tells you the complete and utter delusions of grandeur this man had. The Times reporters found that Epstein was apparently fixated on transhumanism, the belief that the human species can be deliberately advanced through technological breakthroughs such as genetic engineering and artificial intelligence. At its most benign, transhumanism is a belief that humans' problems can be improved, upgraded even, through such technology as cybernetics and artificial intelligence. At its most malignant, though, transhumanism lines up uncomfortably with eugenics. Eugenics is the belief that humanity can be improved by controlled breeding, selecting for preferable traits, and minimizing less desirable ones. Alan Dershowitz, professor emeritus of law at Harvard and former lawyer of Epstein, said that the New York Times investigation that Epstein would at times steer conversations about how to improve the human race genetically, an idea that appalled Dershowitz because of the overlap with Nazi theories about eugenics. Epstein was allegedly fascinated with and inspired by the Germinal Choice, which was founded in Escondido, California in 1980 by Robert K. Graham, an avowed eugenicist and tycoon who got rich developing shatterproof eyeglass lenses. Graham's goal was the strengthening of the human gene pool, and he would accomplish this with a sperm bank. What in the blazes? Sorry, first time I'm reading this article too. A sperm bank? Where all the donors were Nobel laureates. At least that's how it was supposed to work, according to the 2001 story in Slate. Graham only ever convinced three or five? Why would it be 3 or 5? This article to actually contribute, and the program was shuttered in 1999. But Epstein was apparently taken with the idea. In his version, though, rather than a bunch of lettered academics, he'd be the one strengthening the gene pool. Starting in the early 2000s, he reportedly told multiple people that he wanted to impregnate as many women as he could to distribute his genes as widely as possible. Several acquaintances told the New York Times that Epstein mentioned using his sprawling New Mexico ranch as a base of operations, and at least one person said he planned to impregnate up to 20 women at a time. The puzzle at the heart of Epstein's fandom is how it lasted for so long and why he managed to draw so many scientists into his circle. As Kata Pollitt, writing in The Nation last week, said, "What I can't get over is how Epstein successfully weaseled his way into science at the highest level by cultivating major figures, listen to the language, cultivating. What have we talked about? What is Jeffrey Epstein? If he's a CIA agent or an asset of the Mossad, he would be doing his own cultivating. So, cultivating major figures in the field socially and spreading his wealth around. Science, the very temple of the pursuit of truth. Call me insufficiently jaded, but am I wrong to expect more of those who we rely on to combat all the nonsense swirling around us? Yes, you are a bit naive to rely on them, because at the end of the day, even though they're super smart people, they put their pants on one leg at a time the same way as the rest of us, and who knows what their proclivities are when those doors close. Who knows what people are up to in those rooms? Who knows what people do when there's no one else around? We've seen it time and time again, folks. These rich people, these powerful people, they run in these circles. They have these private islands. They go and they meet at these private islands, and they do Lord knows what. And It goes all the way even to the WikiLeaks emails with the Podesta emails when they were talking about spirit cooking and some of the things that they were commenting on in those emails. There's been no answers for any of that, and if you bring it up, forget about it. Nobody wants to hear it. WikiLeaks, what? When in reality, what's in those emails needs to be answered for, just like this other stuff with Epstein needs to be answered for. These people can't go around and act like they had nothing to do with any of it and they've never been involved. It's just unacceptable. It's unacceptable for none of them to really be on record or to have these canned comments that are prepared by their staff. When the people of this country, and really the victims in this case, deserve so much more. So, as you can see, like I said earlier, the reason I picked this article for tonight was it kind of gives us a little context about the circle that Epstein was running in, not only with Bill Gates, but some of the other high-profile scientists that he ran with, and the way they felt about him. Now, was it just admiration, or did he have something on them? I'll leave you guys with that thought for tonight's episode, and I hope that you guys had a great weekend, and I hope you'll be back tomorrow joining us for some more on the Jeffrey Epstein Show.